House Democrats' charges against President Trump have been publicly, repeatedly, consistently been denied by President Zelensky. You heard the defense now from Chairman Schiff. He's lying because he has to. He has to lie because the threats, the demands, the blackmail, the extortion that House Democrats are alleging, if he didn't do that, he couldn't possibly risk military aid. He would have to do anything he had to secure it. The problem with that, the hole in that argument is you have to ask yourself, what did President Zelensky actually do to get the aid? The answer is nothing. Nothing. He didn't open any investigations. He didn't call Attorney General Bill Barr. He didn't do any of the things that House Democrats say.
He did nothing to get the aid. The answer is what he did to get the aid.
Do anything because he didn't
Nothing.
have to.
He didn't have to. The ambassador looking like
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both.
This is one big circus.
Heroic efforts.
And the guy sitting behind the ambassador looked like a serial killer. If a serial killer had a look, that's the one right there.
In your testimony, you said that you had, in mid-August, it became clear to me that Giuliani's efforts to gin up politically motivated.
I mean, they act like there's no grounds to be here. There's no grounds to be here. So what? He talked to him about trying to help get information on Biden. So what? Who cares about that's Joe Biden? So what? He went to a foreign leader from another country to try to hack and get information. That's nothing about impeachment. Impeachment. Oh, you guys act like he was giving trade secrets. There's no ground to be here. Oh my goodness, these people are something else. Then the Mr. Jordan comment. Mr. Jordan. I've heard the word. Oh. Oh man. Mr. Jordan, man. Mr. Jordan has come in here and shook up this entire place. Mr. Jordan. Oh, man. Mr. Jordan. I've never heard the word shitburger thrown around before until this happened. Mr. Jordan has been yelling since this whole thing started. Mr. Jordan.
Message to Mr. Yarmack on September 1st, 2019. Then what you have in front of you is an addendum that Mr. Sondland made to his testimony that we got a couple weeks ago. It says, Declaration of Ambassador Gordon Sondland. I, Gordon Sondland, do hereby swear and affirm as follows. I want you to
go ahead, Mr. Jordan.
Bullet point number 2, second sentence. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmack on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. Now, this is his clarification. Let me read it one more time. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmack on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. We got 6 people having 4 conversations in one sentence, and you just told me this is where you got your clear understanding. Which, I mean, even though you had 3 opportunities with President Zelensky for him to tell you, you know what, we're going to do these investigations to get the aid. He didn't tell you 3 different times. He never makes an announcement, never tweets about it, never does a CNN interview. Pastor, you weren't on the call, were you? You didn't listen on President Trump's call and President Zelensky's call?
I did not.
You've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
I never did.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
You had 3 meetings again with Zelensky and it didn't come up. And then what you have...
Oh, look at him. Oh, hey, Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan went in, didn't he? William Taylor, the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He just trying to find out who the whistleblower is. Michelle's daughter has hit the super chat up. Whoa, what's up, Michelle's daughter? Michelle's daughter has broke off a quarter. What's up? This guy just said something we're happy about. He said we're happy about an impeachment to put a woman in the office. Where did that come from? Who said anything about? I don't even know what he's talking about. He just got some other agenda. The president is impeaching himself. We're not impeaching him. He's doing a fine job of impeaching himself. He don't need any help from old Karceno. He's impeaching himself quite well. They wanted him out from day one. Yeah, well, he shouldn't have been there. I mean, everything he's done in office so far has shown he shouldn't be in office. I mean, the word shitburger was thrown around. Right. I'll tell you, Jim Jordan pulled the ultimate Trump move. What you see and hear has not been real. It's all a part of your imagination. Just imagine, okay? Imagine. I did not talk to the Ukraine president about getting information on Joe Biden for me. No matter how many American hackers we got here, I need hackers from Ukraine. Oh my gosh. You have been accused of rigging an election using Russian help. You go to Russia's on tape talking about getting information on an opponent that might be running against you and Joe Biden to use against him. And this is fake news. Help me understand that. I'm just waiting on someone to help me with that. He put himself in the position that he's in right now. No one else. Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell out of office. If he's not impeached, they wasted a lot of people's time. But to say there's no reason to be here is nuts. Well, Mr. Jordan is acting like a child who got caught playing with himself when his parents opened the closet door. He's in immediate panic. As I testify, Mr. Jordan, is the classiest way I have ever heard someone say, listen, shitbird. That is just beyond hilarious. Mm-hmm. Exactly. We've all been in that situation.
Investigations were now infecting U.S. engagement with Ukraine, leveraging President Zelensky's desire for a White House meeting. Mr. Kent, did you actually write a memo documenting your concerns that there was an effort underway to pressure Ukraine to open an investigation to benefit President Trump?
Yes, ma'am. I wrote a memo to the file on August 16th.
But we don't have access to that memo, do we?
I submitted it to the State Department subject to the September 27th subpoena.
And we have not received one piece of paper from the State Department relative to this investigation. Both of you have made compelling cases of the importance of Ukraine to Europe, to the 70 years of peace, the benefit that it has to the United States national security, and our goal to continue to support sovereignty of nations. Meanwhile, Russia is violently attacking people in Ukraine in the Donbass area. So withholding military aid, does that weaken Ukraine?
Well, I think it sends the wrong signal, and it did for a short period of time. Again, the assistance from the FY19 was released and is in the process of heading towards Ukraine.
Does it embolden Russia when there was no aid being sent to Ukraine?
I think the signal that there's controversy and question about the U.S. support of Ukraine sends the signal to Vladimir Putin that he can leverage that as he seeks to negotiate with not only Ukraine, but other countries.
Thank you. Ambassador Taylor, I think you mentioned that a White House meeting for Zelensky would boost his ability to negotiate for a peaceful settlement with Vladimir Putin and Russia in general. Is that true?
Ms. Spear, it's certainly true that that U.S. support for Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky, in his negotiations with Russians is very important, and will enable him to get a better agreement with that support from the United States, both from the military assistance, but also just from the political assistance that we can provide.
But he has not yet had that White House meeting, has he?
He has not.
I think it's ironic that Soviet-born Lev Parnas, who has now been indicted, had a meeting with the president in the White House after participating in a number of campaign events for the president and contributing $325,000 to the president's PAC. So maybe it's actually the requirement that you give money to the president's PAC in order to get that meeting at the White House. Ambassador Taylor, is it true that the prosecutor general now has opened an investigation in Ukraine?
Ms. Spear, the new prosecutor general that President Zelensky has appointed is indeed investigating crimes in general. Is that your question?
Yes. But is he?
He is in office and is investigating criminal activity.
Has he specified what investigations he's undertaken?
No.
He has not. All right. I yield the rest of my time to Chairman Schiff.
Just a quick question. My colleagues, a couple of my colleagues referenced the conversation, the hot mic conversation between President Obama and President Medvedev. That was in 2012. There's a suggestion that he was saying he was going to go easy on Russia over
Adam Schiff, baby. Nobody can shift this conversation like Adam Schiff, baby. Get in there and come up with something.
To go easy on Russia for an invasion that hadn't happened yet. Do you?
Now, Schiff is a piece of crap himself. Don't think nobody riding with him, too.
It was more or less a rhetorical question. I will yield now to Mr. Stewart, or I'm sorry, Mr. Stewart. Yeah.
Thank you. To the witnesses, thank you. Time is precious, so I'm going to go very, very quickly. Welcome, I think, to year 4 of the ongoing impeachment of President Trump. I'm sorry that you have been dragged into this. I think the sign behind me says it very well. By the whistleblower's attorney, the coup has started and impeachment will follow. But after listening for what is going on now, 4 hours and 21 minutes, after all of the secret hearings, after all of the leaks, after hearing witnesses such as yourselves give your opinions, it really comes down to this. One thing it comes down to. This is the transcript that the president has released of this phone call. There is one sentence, one phone call. That is what this entire impeachment proceeding is based upon. And I got to tell you, if your impeachment case is so weak that you have to lie and exaggerate about it to convince the American people that they need to remove this president, then you've got a problem. And the American people have been lied to again and again on this. We first heard a lot about quid pro quo. And then many people realized that was meaningless. So they said, well, let's go for the fences then. Let's talk about extortion. Let's talk about bribery. Let's talk about cover-up and obstruction, for which there is zero evidence of any of that. We heard a characterization of the president's phone call that was so outrageously inaccurate, it had to be described as a parody. And none of those things matter. None of it matters. It comes down to this. We appreciate your insight. We appreciate your opinion. But all you can do is give your opinion of this one phone call. Let me ask you, gentlemen, both of you have said here today, you have testified, corruption in Ukraine is endemic. Would we agree on that? Simple question. Problem is, isn't it?
It's a problem, and they're taking steps to address it.
Okay, earlier in the hearing, both of you said use the word endemic or agreed to it. It's in the courts, it's oligarchs, it's prosecutors, it's everywhere. And I think we can also agree that that's not the only place in the world where we experience and see corruption. There's dozens and dozens of nations around the world that are steeped in corruption. Would you agree with that?
Mr. I would say that there's corruption in every country, including ours.
Okay, thank you. And some we're clearly more concerned about than others. So in these corrupt nations, of which there are probably hundreds of corrupt individuals, hundreds of corrupt government officials, can you give me an example any time where the Vice President of the United States shows up and demands that a specific prosecutor be fired and gives them a 6-hour time limit to do that? Are you aware of that ever happening any other place? I guess the answer is no. And I just think it's interesting that out of hundreds of corrupt individuals, dozens of corrupt nations, that happened one time. And it happened with the individual whose son was being paid by the organization that was under investigation. One other thing very quickly. If someone was a candidate for a political office, even for a president of the United States, should they be immune from investigation?
Should they?
No one is above the law, sir.
Thank you. I agree with that. I think we all would agree with that. And yet I think some presume that because some of the individuals we're talking about here were candidates, that they are immune from any questions or any investigation. I think it's absurd. For heaven's sakes, if those of us in public office, those of us who have find ourselves up for re-election or all the time as a candidate, I think we have a higher standard, not immunity from asking these types of questions. The last thing, then I'm going to yield my time. Availability of funds. I'm quoting from the NDAA in 2019. The language is specific. Availability of funds under assistance to the Ukraine, it has to be certified. And what has to be certified? Quote, for the purposes of decreasing corruption. Are you surprised that there would be questions about corruption in Ukraine and that it would be discussed withholding some of this aid that's actually required by law that it be withheld if they can't certify that the corruption has been eliminated or is being addressed?
The certification in that case is done by the Secretary of Defense upon advice of his staff in consultation with the interagency community. We were fully supportive of that conditionality, and the Secretary of Defense had already certified that conditionality had been met.
And so we agree that we should withhold funds if there's questions about corruption that have not been addressed. I'm going to yield my rest of my time to Mr. Jordan. Sorry, 18 seconds. You gonna let that go? Thank you. In that case, I will.
Here's Mr. Jordan.
Just quickly. So that certification that took place in May, is that correct, Mr. Kent?
Do not believe it was certified by May. I would defer to my colleague Laura Cooper, who's testified on closed door. But
it was an earlier time.
It had not been done by May because when I was visiting in May, I was asked by Laura to raise a specific issue that would meet the conditionality.
But the DOD did say that they met the certification.
Yes, sir. I think it may have been in the July timeframe.
Thank you. So it's interesting and curious that we're talking about hearsay evidence. And it's extraordinary to me that the committee's been able to get as much information as they had, direct or hearsay, given the instruction. You gentlemen were both asked by the State Department not to appear for your depositions. Is that correct?
We both received, I believe I received initially a letter directing me not to appear. And once the committees issued a subpoena, I was under legal obligation to appear, and I am here today under subpoena.
Ambassador, were you also asked not to be part of the deposition?
Mr. Quigley, I was told by the State Department, don't appear under these circumstances. That was in the letter to me. And when I got the subpoena, exactly as Mr. Kent said, that was different circumstances, and I made a legal subpoena. So that, yes, sir, I'm here for that reason.
Absolutely. But we were not able to hear testimony by Chief of Staff Mulvaney, John Eisenberg, Michael Ellis, John Bolton, more than a dozen witnesses. So I suspect if you have a problem with hearsay, you'd have a lot more direct testimony and direct evidence if you weren't blocking that ability. You'd have a lot more documents that you referred to with my colleagues' questions that have not yet been turned over by state or any other agency. Is that correct to your knowledge, gentlemen?
We're both here under subpoena. I don't think either of us is going to comment why others have not shown up.
But has any of the documents that you turned over, to your knowledge, been turned over to the committee?
No.
Mr. Kent, following the July 25th call and through the first 2 weeks of August, were you involved in any efforts to arrange for President Zelensky to make a statement announcing the 2 investigations that President Trump had talked about in the July 25th call?
I was not, and I would never participate in an arrangement to have them announce investigations.
Ambassador Taylor, were you involved in any such efforts?
No, sir.
I want to show you a text of the exchange. This one's between Ambassador Volker and Andrei Yermak, the same aide to Zelensky that Volker texted before the July 25th call. You weren't involved with it, so I'll read it. The first text is from August 10th. Ambassador Volker text, I agree with your approach. Let's iron out the statement and use that to get date and Prez can go forward with it. Then at 5:42, Mr. Yermak responds, once we have a date, we'll call for a press briefing announcing upcoming visit and outlining vision for a reboot of U.S.-Ukraine relationship, including, among other things, Burisma and election meddling in investigations. Andrei Yermak says that once we have a date, they will announce the investigations in Burisma and election meddling. Mr. Kent, are these the same 2 investigations President Trump asked the Ukrainian president to initiate in the July 25th meeting, 25th call?
Those appear to be the same issues that were mentioned in the call, as well as the media campaign that started in March, led by Rudy Giuliani.
Mr. Kent, as the day-to-day State Department point person in Washington on Ukraine policy, were you aware of this effort to persuade President Zelensky to issue a statement in order to get a White House meeting while they were happening?
When this exchange happened on August 10th, I was not.
What did you know about them?
As Ambassador Taylor referenced earlier in his testimony and oral answering, he heard on August 16th, he then called me and we had a conversation. And at that point, I memorialized my concerns in a note to the file.
Ambassador Taylor, as the point person on the ground in Ukraine, were you aware of this effort to get Ukraine to issue this written statement in early August?
Not the written statement, no, sir.
So the entire discussion about a public statement about the 2 investigations President Trump wanted was done in what you have described as an irregular channel involving Ambassador Sondland and Volker, and they tasked to take on Ukraine policy by the president. Isn't that correct, Mr. Kent?
That would be my understanding.
Ambassador?
The same.
And if it gets to close primer on hearsay, I think the American public needs to be reminded that countless people have been convicted on hearsay because the courts have routinely allowed and created needed exceptions to hearsay. Hearsay can be much better evidence than direct, as we have learned in painful instances, and it's certainly valid in this instance.
Well, gentlemen, yield because none of those exceptions would apply to this testimony.
It's not the time for colloquy. Representative Stefanik, you're recognized.
Thank you. For the millions of Americans viewing today, the 2 most important facts are the following. Number 1, Ukraine received the aid. Number 2, there was in fact no investigation into Biden. Mr. Kent and Ambassador Taylor, you both spoke eloquently and passionately about the need to support Ukraine to counter Russian aggression, particularly during this very critical time. I agree with you in that assessment. And isn't it the case that the Trump administration has indeed provided substantial aid to Ukraine in the form of defensive lethal aid, correct?
That is correct.
And that is more so than the Obama administration, correct?
The
defensive lethal aid.
Yes.
And in the transcript of the president's July 25th call with President Zelensky tells Trump they are ready to buy more javelins. This is indeed the most effective weapon for fighting insurgent armor Russian tanks. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And those javelins were not made available to Ukraine under the Obama administration. The javelins were not made available.
They were not.
Correct. Shifting gears to corruption. One of the themes here today is that of rooting out corruption, which is an important tool for the president as we provide taxpayer-funded aid to foreign countries. Mr. Kent, you would characterize Ukraine as having long-standing corruption issues, correct?
I did.
And in fact, you testified, quote, I would say that corruption is part of the reason why Ukrainians came out to the streets in both 2004 when somebody tried to steal the election and again in 2014 because of a corrupt, kleptocratic, pro-Russian government which eventually collapsed. The Ukrainians decided enough was enough. Is that your testimony?
It remains so.
And you testified that you first came to learn about Burisma in 2015 when you were the senior anti-corruption coordinator, correct?
Correct. Detailed to this embassy in Kyiv as the acting deputy chief of mission.
And you testified that the issue of corruption in Burisma was in the U.S. interest because, quote, and this is from your deposition, we had made a commitment to the Ukrainian government in 2014 to try to recover an estimated tens of billions of dollars of stolen assets out of the country. Is that correct?
That is a stolen assets that were in the name of the owner of Burisma, Mykola Zlochevsky. He was the one who we believed had stolen the money.
Sure. So the first case, this was the first case that the US, the UK, and Ukraine investigators worked on was against the owner of Burisma.
That's correct.
And this was during the Obama administration.